UK Coal decided to fight a test case in the pretty village of Ravenstone in Leicestershire. The company had asked for planning permission to dig nearly 750,000 tonnes of coal out of a green field site next to the village. This met with fierce opposition.
Just checking your flexible brake pipes.
Garage owner Virg Rikiki and local MP David Taylor have been fighting proposals for mining their countryside for years. They were delighted when the County Council rejected the scheme.
But the core reason was that the cumulative impact of open casting on this area had gone beyond the level which was acceptable.
But with millions of pounds at stake, UK Coal wanted the decision overturned. The application to mine in Leicestershire went to a public inquiry, and in May 2006, the County Council was eventually overruled by the government that had previously been so against open casting.
The inquiry was a travesty, an utter travesty. Sadly and unaccountably, it went through.
They'll say one thing today, and tomorrow they'll change their mind, hoping that people will have forgotten about it.
We're actually sitting on coal. The whole area, probably a 30-40 mile square area. We've just been over that wonderful woodland. And they'll have no compulsion in removing all of that to get the coal from beneath it if they needed to.
They do return it to countryside after they finish.
Yes, but how do you return a 150-year-old mature oak tree? How do you make hedgerows as diverse and ancient as they are here?
UK Coal says such fears are unwarranted, but residents have real concerns about expansion. What about all the coal in the fields around here? Millions of tonnes. Yeah. You're just going to leave that?
We have no intentions of going outside of this site boundary. We actually have we've been written into a legal agreement on that. We'll finish this scheme on time and we'll do what we said we were going to do.
So, if Panorama comes back here in 2 years' time, you'll not be saying, well, actually, we think there might be another few 100,000 tonnes of coal we'd like to go for.
Yeah. You won't. Actually, where you'll be standing, you'll be in a field.
Approval for the open cast site at Ravenstone marked a turning point. Shortly before its success there, UK Coal was feeling far more bullish. Its chairman reported,
"We are more optimistic that further planning approvals will be obtained, which will allow access to substantial reserves."
He was right. Last year, no open cast applications were rejected, while 14 were approved, compared with just 4 in 2005. In the 1980s, the coal industry couldn't pay its way.
The annual losses in the coal industry are enormous, 1.3 billion last year. You have to find that money as taxpayers.
Now then, here we are in pit bottom. Watch your head, watch your feet, please.
But the industry is now talking confidently of expansion. At the moment, coal mined in Britain provides just 10% of our electricity. But there are hopes that this will now increase.
Higher international prices means that the reserve base is certainly there to support a higher level of output, and we hope to be able to increase output somewhat from the level that it is at the moment.
So do you expect there to be more open cast sites in Britain?
Either more or larger ones, or ones lasting a longer period of time.
Do you see why it looks as if the government has reversed its policy here? It came in against open cast mining on greenfield sites. It's now giving approval for open cast mining on greenfield sites. It looks like a U-turn, doesn't it?
Well, I don't think it's a U-turn.
Looks like one.
I think there is some shift in emphasis. I mean, let's look at what we're talking about here. Output in the open cast mining peaked as recently as 1991. at 21 million tonnes. It's since fallen to about 8.5.
And it's now rising
We
again.
would expect some increase in production, but only to the level of perhaps 10 to 11 million tonnes a year. We as operators would clearly like to produce as much as we can, but we recognise, I think, that within those environmental constraints, output is likely to rise to 10 to 11 to 12 million tonnes a year, something in that range.
Which means more.
Which is more than has been, but certainly considerably less than at some time in the past.
Not everyone is as happy as the mining companies. Coal has become a new focus of direct action protests.
This is not a riot! This is not a riot! This is not a riot!
In August, opponents of coal staged one of the biggest climate change demonstrations the UK has ever seen at Kings North in Kent, where there are plans to build a new coal-fired power station. Their main concern is that 80% of the global rise in carbon dioxide is caused by burning fossil fuels. And you don't get worse than coal. The government is pinning its hopes on clean coal technology called carbon capture and storage. But is that all they are? Hopes.
Mr. Speaker, the government accepts all of the recommendations of the Committee on Climate Change. We will amend the Climate Change Bill to cut greenhouse gas emissions by 80% by 2050, and that target will be binding in law.
It's easy enough to promise a dramatic cut in carbon emissions. The hard part is to deliver it.
Turn right on Dresden-Strasse.
You have to travel to a small town in eastern Germany to see the world's first project to make dirty old coal an environmentally friendly fuel. Why is this plant important?
Vattenfall is building the world's first pilot plant for carbon capture and storage, which means that we will capture CO2 from the combustion process of a coal power plant in order to liquefy and then store it underground to get rid of CO2 emissions.
Isn't this really too little too late?
We have to act really, really fast in order to combat climate change. But right now, there are no other options. We do believe that we will need to have an energy supply fully based on renewables within a few years' time. But until this plan has been developed, we need an idea of how to deal with coal and CO2 emissions.
In Britain, the government says it wants clean coal technology developed because it can cut 90% of emissions. But to date, there's no working pilot project here.
We're a little bit disappointed that there are not perhaps 2 or 3 demonstration projects in this country. There's going to be about a dozen projects or perhaps more in Europe as a whole. And if the government had arranged for 2 or 3 of these to be in this country, I think that would have demonstrated more effective leadership.
Build on existing power stations.
Tom Burke has advised 3 environment secretaries and has worked for both Labour and Tory governments. He's incensed at the slow pace of progress here towards clean coal technology.
We'll have to build. The real problem is that the government's talking a wonderful talk on climate change, but it's not actually squaring that in terms of its actions. We really need to be much further ahead than we are now, and the reason we aren't much further ahead than we aren't now is because simply the government hasn't been prepared to spend the money to get going. What you get from the government is a lot of rhetoric. What you don't get from the government is a lot of clear commitment to spend the money needed to turn that rhetoric into reality. The government is lethargic.
We wanted to ask the government about its policy on coal and whether